Welcome back to WNBA Updates. What we witnessed after the Indiana Fever's loss to the Atlanta Dream was not just another tough post-game press conference. It was a moment that ripped the curtain off a tension that has been quietly building inside the Fever organization all season long. And at the center of it all, Caitlyn Clark standing at a live microphone in front of every reporter in that room, pointing directly at her coaching staff's defensive system and saying plainly that it is not working. Let's break down everything that happened, what it means, and why the Indiana Fever front office needs to be paying very close attention right now. This was supposed to be one of the most celebratory nights of Caitlyn Clark's young professional career. Her signature sneaker was making its debut. Marketing teams had this date circled on their calendars months in advance. It was meant to be a milestone moment, cameras flashing, highlight reels rolling, a night that would live in WNBA history for all the right reasons. Instead, it turned into one of the most damaging nights of Indiana's season. Clark was absolutely dealing heading into the fourth quarter. She had 26 points and 7 assists and was on pace for a dominant performance on the biggest promotional day of her year. Then it all unraveled. She fouled out. Just like that, she was done. Those 26 and 7 numbers froze on the stat sheet because the Indiana Fever's defensive scheme left her completely exposed to picking up exactly the kind of cheap, frustrating fouls that opponents have been deliberately hunting all season long. On the night her shoe debuted, Clark watched the game fall apart from the bench, the victim of a defensive system that had already failed the team in the same exact way multiple times before. When she sat down for the post-game press conference, she was not going to pretend otherwise. Here is what separates this moment from a typical frustrated post-game quote. Clark did not offer vague complaints. She did not hide behind the usual, "We just need to play better as a team" language that athletes use to deflect tough questions without saying anything real. She went specific. She went technical. She went on record. She pointed out exactly when the defensive breakdown happened. She named the precise cuts that Atlanta was scoring off of, the 90 cuts and the 45 cuts, terms that any basketball coach would immediately recognize as a direct critique of rotation failures. She noted that the team slipped back into patterns that had already been proven not to work. And then she said something that should have made every coach in that building uncomfortable. She essentially asked, "Why are we going back to a defense we already know does not work?" That is not a frustrated athlete venting after a bad night. That is a player making a clear, documented, technical argument that her coaching staff system is structurally broken. On camera. In front of every reporter covering the team. And she was not alone. Her teammate Kelsey arrived at the same conclusion during that same press conference, noting that Atlanta's entire roster shot over 50% from the field. When an entire opposing team is shooting that efficiently, it is not bad luck. It is not a few unlucky bounces. That is a defensive scheme that failed to contest a single shot or create any discomfort on any possession across 40 minutes of basketball. Both Clark and Mitchell said it out loud in public together. That is no longer one player venting. That is a locker room sending a message. To really understand why that press conference was such a significant moment, you have to understand that this was not a one-night disagreement. This is a season-long clash between two very different visions of how defense should be played. Stephanie White's coaching philosophy has been consistent all year. Guard your matchup. Win your individual battle. Trust your teammate to handle their assignment. Individual accountability over collective rotation. It is a straightforward approach, but it comes with a significant vulnerability against teams that move the ball quickly and attack open gaps. Clark has been pulling the opposite conclusion from Indiana's defensive disasters all year long. Her argument, made again and again after losses, is that isolated one-on-one containment without help rotations is exactly what fast perimeter teams are built to exploit. When opponents can put the ball on the floor.
We know the Indiana Fever took a disgusting loss to the Atlanta Dream in Caitlyn Clark's sneaker debut day in a game where she was absolutely going off, 26 and 7 going into the fourth quarter, and then she finishes the game with 26 and 7 due to foul trouble.
Drive into the lane. And nobody rotates to help because everyone is locked onto their own assignment. Those drives turn into easy baskets or wide-open kick-outs every single time. This is not some advanced, complicated basketball theory. Rotations and help defense are foundational concepts at every level of the game. The fact that Clark keeps having to point this out after losses and that the staff keeps returning to the same approach without adjustment is what makes this situation so alarming. 3 times this happened. Golden State, Portland. Then Atlanta on sneaker debut night. 3 separate opponents, 3 separate games, the same defensive gaps exploited in the same way every single time. Clark called it out after each one. The coaching staff went back to the same system regardless. After Clark finished speaking, the room waited. Stephanie White walked up to that same microphone knowing full well what her star player had just said. Reports from reporters inside that press room described her as visibly and unmistakably different from her usual composed self. The controlled, poised head coach that Indiana fans had come to recognize was gone. In her place was someone who looked like a leader struggling to process the fact that her franchise player had just publicly dismantled her coaching philosophy in front of the entire media. And what did she do at that podium? She defended her system. She leaned back on the same talking points about individual responsibility and one-on-one containment. The exact approach Clark had just identified as the root of the problem. There was no acknowledgement of the rotation failures Clark had pointed out. No engagement with the specific critique. No indication that anything was going to change. That disconnect, Clark diagnosing the problem with precise detail while White defends the system that created it just minutes later, is as clear a sign as we have seen all year that these two are simply not watching the same game. Here is where this goes beyond a coaching disagreement and becomes a genuine organizational crisis. Caitlyn Clark is putting up numbers that any honest observer...
One-on-one D, that was pretty much the story of when we had our defensive failings. It was our one-on-one D. We tried to wait until they caught the ball to defend. We didn't make it difficult for them.
Our one-on-one defense. Why are we playing one-on-one the whole time? Now, I get it on straight line blow-bys. I understand that. But you had plays where people are putting the ball on the floor, dribble, and nobody is stepping over to help at any point in time. Why would you go back to this when you saw this did not work?
Them to pass the ball around the perimeter, and they're fast. When they catch it on the run and attack our feet, we're already behind.
Observer would call MVP caliber. 20 points, 8 assists, and 4 rebounds per game. Her scoring and assist totals rank inside the top 5 across the entire WNBA. She is doing everything right individually, and yet her MVP chances are sliding. Prediction markets have shown a clear downward trend in Clark's odds over the last month. The reason is not her performance. It is Indiana's record. The Fever were sitting at 9-6, stuck in 7th place, despite having arguably the most individually dominant guard in the league. Meanwhile, A'ja Wilson is averaging 26 points, 9 rebounds, 3 assists, 2 blocks, and over a steal per game while leading Las Vegas to the second-best record in the league. MVP voters weigh team records heavily. That is just the reality of how the award gets decided. And every single loss Indiana suffers because of these defensive breakdowns directly damages Clark's case, through absolutely no fault of her own production on the court. Paige Bueckers has entered the MVP conversation as well, despite ranking behind Clark in scoring, assists, and rebounds, simply because Dallas has turned their season around, and she is the primary reason why. The votes follow winning. Indiana is not winning enough games that Clark's numbers clearly deserve. Every time Stephanie White returns to a defensive system that opposing teams have already figured out how to attack, she is not just costing Indiana a game. She is actively costing Caitlyn Clark an MVP award that her individual brilliance has earned. That is a significant thing to sit with. The Indiana Fever front office is watching all of this play out in public, and at some point, they have to ask themselves a very serious question. When your franchise player, the most popular player in the entire WNBA, the player whose star power has driven this organization's commercial growth and national visibility to levels the league has never seen before, stands at a press conference podium and explains in specific technical terms exactly why the defensive system keeps failing. And your head coach responds by defending that same system while looking visibly agitated by the conversation. Who do you trust to lead this team forward? Clark has been right about this 3 times now. She correctly identified the defensive breakdown after Golden State. She pointed it out again after Portland. She laid it out in clear technical language for everyone to hear after Atlanta. The pattern is documented. It is on record. It is not a matter of interpretation. White has had 3 separate opportunities to make an adjustment. She has not taken any of them. That is not grit. That is not a philosophical commitment that deserves respect. At a certain point, returning to a strategy that has been repeatedly exposed as ineffective, ignoring real-time feedback from the most talented player on your roster, and responding to public critique with visible frustration rather than genuine engagement is a coaching problem. and it is a coaching problem that the front office cannot afford to ignore much longer. Here is the honest truth about where the Indiana Fever stand right now. This is not a situation that is going to quietly resolve itself. The tension between Clark and White is no longer something fans have to decode from box scores and subtle sideline body language. It is out in the open. It is on record. It happened at a live microphone with every reporter in the building watching. Clark is not going to stop pointing out the defensive failures because they keep happening and they keep costing this team games. White does not appear willing to change course based on everything she has shown so far this season. And every game that passes without an adjustment is another loss on Indiana's record, another hit to Clark's MVP campaign, and another crack in the relationship between the franchise's most important player and the coach responsible for putting her in a position to succeed. The Fever have a decision to make. Not next month, not at the end of the season. Now. Because the longer this goes unaddressed, the more damage it does to a team that, with the right defensive adjustments, should absolutely be competing for a top 4 seed and making noise in the playoffs. Caitlyn Clark is doing her part. She is putting up MVP numbers every single night. She is calling out the problems with precision and accountability. She is doing everything a franchise player is supposed to do. The question now is whether the organization around her is willing to listen. That is the full picture of what went down in that press conference and what it means for the Indiana Fever going forward. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think Stephanie White makes an adjustment after this very public moment? Or does this pattern continue until the front office is forced to step in? If you enjoyed this video, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below. I read every single one.